morning. Welcome to The Old School, a podcast about the American education system, its characteristics, its traits, its problems, deficiencies, demerits, flaws, just general shortcomings and weaknesses, and also foibles, but also possible solutions. Good morning, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Herr Miller, how are you doing this fine Sunday morning?
I'm doing great. I got problems, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, as you know, I drove to Florida over the Thanksgiving break.
Which break? You get so many as a teacher.
Thanksgiving. Let me tell you something, buddy. I'm hard at it. So back to the salt mines tomorrow. But
wow.
But nevertheless, so I was driving to and fro Florida, and it dawned on me. What are you laughing about?
To and fro Florida. I like that.
Yes. So I was driving to and fro Florida, and it dawned on me something, and that is I have serious doubts that your typical American driver knows how to drive on an interstate.
You're just discovering that now, or it took you a trip to Florida for like 25 hours or whatever it took to figure it out?
It's not that I just figured it out. It's just I just realized the enormity, the scale of this deficiency that Americans seem to have on the highways and byways of the United States. And because of that, and here's the more problematic trend. Not only do the Americans not know how to drive, or some of them don't, some of them are excellent drivers, but the mainstay, the ones you could always depend on for following the rules of the law, was the truck drivers. Okay. And it seems like the truck drivers today have lost, maybe it's a new batch and they were never taught the right way to drive, but it was annoying. It was dangerous at times.
It was dangerous. So it sounds like an example is in order, because you're making a blanket statement. I know you would want to flesh that out a little bit.
Okay, well, here's your example.
Thank you.
So, for example, when you are driving, when you are cruising, the right lane is where you're supposed to be. The left lane is for passing. And for some reason, it seems almost as if people have come to a general conclusion that the left lane is now the cruising lane and the right lane is for passing. And I think that's confusing some of our newer truck drivers as well.
So they're passing on the right?
They're passing on the right. They're passing on the left. I saw one guy pass on the side of the road. It was a pale male experience on the interstates going to and from Florida. And then, then you just have like the regular stuff that's quasi almost homicidal in its potential impact. You got a person driving, 85 miles an hour with a phone 6 inches from their face.
Okay.
They are basically at the helm of a missile that could wipe out small villages, and they have no idea what's happening around them. Zero. And it makes you realize that while I may know how to drive, and listen, I'm not putting myself up there as the paragon of driving abilities.
I know this. I've been with you.
But that said, I'm a damn sight better than some of the yahoos I saw on the roads when I was driving to and from Florida. This is potentially a national emergency. It is a miracle, the likes of which have started small religions, that we have not had massive accidents strewn about the highways and byways of the United States. And we probably have. But it just seems to me like a potential national crisis.
Well, I was thinking that you were, knowing your background, I was thinking that you were going to say that people out there were driving too slowly for your liking.
Well, no. The problem is not people driving slowly, because there is a designated spot for you to kind of pedal along, even though that in and of itself presents its own dangers. That's the right lane. But when you're doing it like in the left lane or in the middle lane, that's where you have even a greater possibility of causing an accident.
So
Are you with me?
well, I'm trying to figure out because I like to putter along in the middle lanes because if I'm in the right lane, I'm having to deal with people merging in, and it's sort of the lesser of evils. But the far left lane, if there are three, I'm not fast enough usually, and I get people honking and all of that. But
You do understand it's easier to merge into a lane that's going, relatively speaking, slower.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm an advocate of going back to 55 miles an hour, and
No. That's outrageous.
I was thinking about running for mayor or something with that as my platform. That's it. We need to slow down, and it's more of I guess you would say a utilitarian argument. You know, that there would be fewer deaths, which is a good thing, and insurance money would be saved, and overall, we're not getting there that much faster if we drive 80 as opposed to 55, because 80 means 90 for most people. So I say stop it, and then maybe people would be just because they love their community, and they would just slow down automatically. I know I would.
Let me tell you something. If you ran for city council under that platform,
yeah, I would have your vote.
You would be the Andrew Yang or Tulsi Gabbard of that particular race. You'd be like one of the first ones out. And then everyone will say, hey, do you remember there was a doctor that was running sometime somewhere? Because let me tell you something. You know what happens when the system works well. That's called the Autobahn. And you and I have been on the Autobahn.
That doesn't work well either. You're talking about missiles. Their missiles are going about twice as fast as ours.
Yes, but they don't have the car accidents that we do, because everybody understands the rules.
Yeah, but they have them, and then there's like death and destruction. I mean,
there's going to be death. There's going to be death and destruction no matter what. The question is, how do you minimize it?
So why are you in such a hurry? What's wrong with slowing it down to 55? It would solve a lot of problems.
Except for the fact that you would drive everyone insane.
That's not my problem.
Listen, when I was in Iceland, so that ring road that they have in Iceland, and they make a big deal about it when you rent a car in Iceland, they say, don't speed, because they look for tourists, and don't speed.
Okay.
It's very, very strict. And the speed limit amounts to about 50 miles an hour.
I love it.
Yeah. That's crazy.
No, it isn't. Is it worth people dying on the roads? I mean, you're going to have just for time, just to get there a little bit earlier, you know. And
now, I will say that the only justification for the 50-mile-an-hour speed zone in Iceland is that you are, for the most part, dealing with a 2-lane road.
Sure,
but I mean, it's just insanely slow by today's standards. If you're out like in West Texas, did you know there's a road in West Texas that has an 85-mile-an-hour speed limit sign?
Okay,
because you can't really hurt anybody out there. What I'm saying is that in general, what we have realized is that it's not the speed that burns gasoline. It's the changing of speeds that can sometimes burn gasoline inefficiently. And so if you drive consistently at 55, you drive consistently at 75, you're not really causing that much more problems.
Well, I don't trust most people, except maybe you and me, to drive 75 or 70 or even above 60. I don't think these people. I mean, your argument early on, a long time ago when we started this conversation, was that people can't freaking drive anymore, and so suddenly you're making an argument but let's let them go 75, maybe 85 in the right circumstance. I would say that they lost that right, because they're not good drivers anymore. Because
the issue is not how fast they're driving; it's how they're driving.
And it's just that one thing, two things.
Well, that's a big thing, though. That's a big thing. Certainly, you would say that driving with your cell phone 6 inches from your face is at the very least problematic.
But there's no. I mean, I guess on some roads they're saying the left lane is for passing.
It is.
But no, it isn't. It's common law. It's something. In most cases, it's not. You're not going to get pulled over for that.
No.
But many people drive there because it's a little smoother. You get these bumpy roads. They just kind of sit there. I'm sure you could ask some of these drivers why they cruise along slowly in the left lane, and they probably say, "Well, we're all here to annoy Mr. Miller, and we know he's coming."
That's right. Everyone, leave a comment. Oh, hang on a second. We haven't created the comments. So we haven't enabled the comment section.
Yeah,
yet.
that's
all right. Well, forget I said anything.
No, I like the argument, but
we need a national conversation. Right after all the other national conversations that we need, we also need one on this.
Well, I'm throwing my hat in the ring.
Okay, here we go.
Let's slow it down. Weren't we happier in the 1970s? I think so.
Yes, but I would say it had to do a lot more other things besides just what speed we were going.
Well, but back then your cars were made out of steel, and they were a lot more dangerous than today, even at 55. So, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? What is the motivation behind all this?
Oh, that was a good transition.
Thank you.
I don't know. I mean, you're following rules. We would like people to be motivated for maybe a more altruistic reason, that they want to drive the speed limit up, because of their community, and they want to keep their community safe, as opposed to self-interest where you want to get there as quickly as you can and pass as many people as possible.
And that then begs the question, what is the motivation of the average student? Not too long ago, fairly recently, you wrote a review of a book by Edward Deci.
Deci. Just think of the letters D and C and put them next to each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll mention his name again, but if I ever do, I'll keep that in mind. D and C.
Just say it. It's DC.
I said it. I said DC. Anyway, you wrote a review of his book. I think you gave it like 2 stars.
I didn't. We don't have star rankings when you do a book review. That's not what it is. It's not Amazon here. It's a serious book, and I wrote about it.
So
thumbs up.
He along with a gentleman named, was it Richard Ryan?
Yes, spelled or pronounced Ryan.
Yes, I knew how to say Ryan. So anyway, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci has written a book. Yes,
they didn't write.
They haven't read that. Deci is the one that wrote the book.
Just quit it.
Okay. So anyway, DC has written a book, and it is based upon research that he and Richard Ryan are known for, and that you are also known for with regards to motivation theory and what empowers kiddos to do well or not do well. Can you talk a little bit about what their motivational theory is?
Sure. This the review is for the classical education review, and that's just what they do, is have people review books and also connect it to classical education and the implications for that. So this is an older work, 1995, but the theory is called self-determination theory, and it's a motivational theory. I use the word theory a lot now. So his question, the title is why we do what we do. There's a everyday understanding of motivation and the idea that you can motivate people. And what DC is talking about is how can you create conditions where people can motivate themselves. And we also, in everyday language, think about how motivated you are as something that you can say, I'm highly motivated or I'm not motivated at all. And I guess one of the tenets of this book and the theory is that it's not about how much motivation, but it's about the quality of motivation. Are you motivated internally, or is it because you're going to get a gold star or a good grade or something like that? So we're addressing the why has a qualitative term, as opposed to let's increase motivation in general.
Right. So how does that apply to, because what they are doing is they're talking about this, as I understand it, they're talking about this as kind of like a big picture sort of thing, as far as what motivates people to do things, what motivates individuals to learn something or what have you. You've narrowed it down to talk about not just students, but also teachers as well, and their abilities to engage with material or their inabilities to engage with material. So how do you take those ideas and how have you kind of applied them to within the school environment, like the high school environment?
It's a complicated question because we would call it a motivational orientation, how you approach things and what is it that drives you. It's very specific, so it's not a fixed disposition where here's somebody who's an intrinsically motivated person. So I can't say that about myself. It depends on the domain,
and the day.
That's right. Absolutely. Am I motivated to do this podcast? Well, yes, because it's really fun. But it gets complicated when it's a task that may not be fun or not be interesting. And, if we jump into school, lots of things we do in school are not inherently interesting as well. So I think when you look at motivation, it's not just in general about your orientation, but your orientation on a specific task, a very specific task, and it changes. And it's not a binary idea that I'm internally or intrinsically motivated or I'm extrinsically, but there's a continuum in there, and it ideally there's a mechanism where you can internalize and change the quality of your motivation over time. And I think that's in some ways the point of education is to help children, want to learn. And then we've talked about that in almost every podcast, that sometimes these social factors, like the way parents raise their children and the way that teachers teach students can have an undermining effect, and it's a unintended consequence. They're not reading Ed Deci, and they're and so in many cases, what is considered a best practice, a best parenting practice, particularly incentivizing and praising, does have some unintended consequences, and what it has an effect of creating a controlling environment where I mentioned motivational orientation. It can change and become less intrinsic, and that's really what we see in schools.
So you're saying that one's orientation in regards to motivation is a highly malleable one.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so by creating an environment that's, the term that Deci uses is autonomy supportive, giving choices, taking someone's perspective, giving not a controlled environment. You make it more possible, but there are so many things that are just part of school, and I've done some research, and there's also some longitudinal research that shows that academic motivation drops from third grade through eighth grade, and then there's a little bit of a increase maybe in 11th grade. And my work has shown even a consistent drop throughout high school. But starting with students who are very interested and love school, and then it drops. And so the question is, what practices happen at those crucial times when it really starts to drop? And it's the testing, the grading, we shift. And according to self-determination theory, humans, this is a human theory. It's not an educational theory. It applies across all domains. But that people are inherently curious about their environment. They want to learn about it. They want to manipulate it. They want to understand. And what we're doing to that drive to understand in a school setting is we control it, and eventually we choke it out with some of these practices that teachers, and we've talked about it in some of our podcasts, think are this is the way to do it. We want to pay children to read. We want to reward. We want to turn our classroom into Jeopardy. We want to talk about tests and say the word "this is on the test" or the phrase 40 times a day.
Right.
So what that does is have a cumulative effect. And then I would suggest that the parenting style does the same thing. And so you can double down on rewards. And when a kid gets home, and if you're lucky enough to talk to them at the dinner table and ask them how they're doing in school, they're going to give you a number. And they're not going to tell you what they're learning. They're going to say, I'm at 85.
Well, before we burrow down more into what education and sometimes what parents do to kind of shoot ourselves in the foot in this regard, is there a point of no return? Is there a point where a kid has been conditioned so much towards a particular motivational orientation that you can't change it?
You're thinking about students who are kind of grade mongers who have just, that becomes their whole sense, their whole identity.
Their identity, yes.
Yeah, is the class ranking, which, I'm number 2, I'm number 4.
But is there any saving of those folks? I mean, could we change them with the right, kind of methodology, the right, kind of conditioning, so that when they get to university, they are not like that? Or is there so much baggage? Is there so much kind of emotional tie-in to whatever orientation they have that it just simply can't be changed past a certain point?
I think it's like you said, it's malleable. It depends on the teacher and what they're doing. I mean, take those same kids who are competing for class ranking, and you know who they are. You
Sure.
can picture some of them. Those same kids are in band, where they have a different motivation, and there is a competitive element to music, something I don't really support. It's at a certain level. I mean, it helps musicians get to a level of competence, which is really important. But it depends on what they're doing, and so it's not something across all tasks, and they're going to encounter different environments. But I think you're right to an extent that at the university, it doesn't stop. And we've both taught university courses, and going over our syllabus is like you have a group of lawyers in front of you asking, so this test is going to happen, and how is it weighted, and what happens if I stub my toe on the way to the test, and can I have a retake? All these things. So it doesn't change, and it's even the same with doctoral work. I teach doctoral students, and they're definitely focused on that. But as a teacher, and you do the same thing. We don't bring up the grade very much. We don't bring up the test, and we're trying to do whatever we can to press back on that. And so I think there's always hope. It depends on the domain, the subject, and I think the teacher has a lot, or the professor has a lot to do with that. Is it a controlling environment, or is it autonomy supportive? Because eventually the incentives go away. If you're paying somebody to read a book, that may work, and it's it can be very effective. They compete over the summer. I think I mentioned this in the article. And but what happens when you stop paying them? Eventually, maybe the motivation to read at all will go away, and I think that communicates something that's confusing, particularly to a young child, because this is already fun. Now I'm getting paid for it, and normally you get paid for things that aren't as fun as reading.
It's interesting, because one of the reasons why I asked the last question about at what point does it become too late? Do the attitudes ossify, and you basically deal with a kid that cannot be reached? And it mainly because I've come across it, and I don't know if it's because I'm a lone voice in the wilderness who's saying this, and it's not enough to offset everything else they hear. But I remember I have I teach AP US history, but I also teach one section of what is referred to as on-level world history. And this is basically the non-honors, non-AP version of a course. And I gave them a project to do. And one of the first questions, of course, that was asked, because the project was going to be a test grade, was, what is the rubric? I said, there is no rubric.
And who asked you this? A kid?
Or a kid. One of the kids asked me, he said, can we get the rubric for this? And I said, there is no rubric. There is no bathroom. There's no rubric. What? Yeah. And some of them were puzzled. Others, to suggest they even had an opinion, would suggest they were paying attention. It depends on the day, but
the people being unfair now.
The people who were paying attention, they looked puzzled. And I said, listen, I said, I want you to explore here. I don't want you to kind of tick boxes. I don't want the same project from every single person. I want to see where you take this. But of course, it's so different from everything else they get. You could very easily say that the lesson was lost on them. And that's why I guess I kind of wondered, is there a point where they're just beyond, they cannot be reached,
Well, I mean, the schools definitely ramp it up, and it seems to increase as they get specific subjects, because then it segments the knowledge, and you're posting grades, for the parents and for the kids so they can monitor it. So you're definitely pushing against the tide. But I still think you do it. I mean, you actually have students who are following and becoming part of the discussion, and it's not done to increase their grade. I guess some do, but it's not so transactional. So I think that it's a challenge of teachers, because here's what happens. Particularly, well, all teachers, but particularly younger teachers, they use that test and the extrinsic motivator to control their class. It's what keeps them keeps their students in line and gives them power, and because they hold the test in their hand and they also hold the grade book, and so these are scarce resources, so it's a bit of power that they wield, and it's not through great teaching. Sometimes it's using those tactics.
So let's talk about the tactics. You kind of mentioned a few of them briefly a few minutes ago, but also looking at it kind of more broadly, we think about, what do teachers do, but also us as parents. What do parents do? And I imagine this may be more applicable in what Dr. Deci and Dr. Ryan have done over the years, just like a general conditioning of how kids are raised and how kids are brought up and how they're conditioned and what have you. So, I mean, is there like a big ticket item as far as something that parents do and then something that teachers do that can have a pretty detrimental effect on how kids orient themselves from a motivational point of view?
I think the big ticket item has to do with the perception of the child or the adult, if you're in a work circumstance or whatever it is. But are you perceiving these interactions as controlling or supportive, autonomy supportive? Because it's better to look at examples, but you see so many parents who want their children to do well in sports. I think it's a fair example of how they are there to be supportive, but they're also either perceived as supportive or controlling, and many parents take it too far very quickly, and they start to micromanage the child and offer incentives, and suddenly that it does become controlling, and so there's some psychic dissonance for doing some activity that they enjoy, but now it's competitive, and competition, has a lot of benefits, but it also serves, functionally as a controlling device. So between that and the incentives and the control and just the tone of it, this can be the same thing can be accomplished in an autonomy supportive way, where you have conversations, and the type of feedback is important. And this is true for teachers as well as parents. The idea of just saying "good job" can be controlling or not. But the better approach to create the sense of autonomy is to explain, give informational feedback, or better yet, ask a question. How are you feeling about this? What were you thinking when you did that, rather than what were you thinking when you did that? So it's the same words, but it's about the tone and perceptions. And I think when you're in a classroom, many students are bracing for control. I mean, that's what they expect. You see it on the first day.
Right.
They're checking you out, they're sizing you up, you pass out the syllabus, and it's kind of some activity that's happening that's not teaching. what's the game going to be here? But I think the idea of perceptions is really important, because you could have students who perceive the here Miller style of teaching is really controlling, and others considered autonomy supportive. So a lot of it has to do with what they bring to the classroom also.
So, from a teacher standpoint, one of the things that I do in the first day is I don't hand out a syllabus.
Good for you. Wow.
And I don't hand out classroom expectations. And I do recall a couple of years ago, I had a student that asked me about that. He said, what are your expectations as far as what I should be doing in the class? I said, what do you think you should be doing in the class? And there's times when kids ask me questions that I feel like not that I was ever a rabbi, but maybe there's something in the DNA, but there's like this kind of rabbi-like response. You give a kind of a Talmudic shrug, and then you look at them and say, what do you think you should be doing? And it's for the student, I think if I can read them correctly, I think they find the answer very unsatisfying. I find it quite satisfying, because and that's not to say that I am that, I'm not that way every single day in the classroom. You do, when you follow a particular curriculum, you do have to kind of take the bull by the horn sometimes. But I think every time I can, I put it back on them. I think one of the reasons why I do a discussion-oriented classroom is to put it on them. What are you getting out of this? What do you take from this? And I think, of course, I think some of the kids just assume I stop the discussion and just tell them what they need to know. But then again, I find that unsatisfactory on a couple of levels, not least of which, professionally and otherwise. From a parental point of view, I think about the notion of trying to get my 8-year-old to help out around the house. Now, you talk about the kind of the autonomy. What is the term you used again that Dr. Deci and Ryan have discussed?
It's autonomy support as opposed to control, which you see in the classroom giving the rules on day one. Mm-hmm. And so you're already starting with autonomy support. But go on, about the chores. Well,
I remember when we first started talking to my daughter about the notion of chores, we talked about the idea, that a household works because everybody does something that supports the household. And invariably, she would ask for like an example. And I said, well, an example might be you cleaning your room. And she says, well, why do I have to clean my room? And I said, why do you think someone might ask you? Again, it goes back to putting the question back on them, and again, this should not be understood as some foolproof way of getting your kids to do chores in an intrinsically motivated sort of way, because I find that I'm having this conversation regularly with my daughter, but I think it always amounts to having her to be able to understand, not for me to make her understand. And it's difficult. And there are times you're sitting there going, I don't know what the hell Dr. Deci and Dr. Ryan think this is working, but at the same time, you come to realize that it may have more to do with, your limitations as a parent or as a teacher than it does about the theory itself, because the theory itself seems sound.
Yeah, I can picture you just make the request, but yell it really, really loud. That's really probably how a lot of parents would proceed. But, some of it is developmental. You're not going to have a 6 or 7-year-old wonder, well, what about the utility of this? If everybody didn't do their chores, we would have a terrible world, because nothing would get done. Should I have my mother or my father do chores for me? Wouldn't I feel guilty about that? They do enough for me. They're so kind. Gosh, I'm not chores. But we want them to get to that point, yes. and a lot of parents use guilt. They use it really, really well.
I grew up in a Jewish household. We us and Catholics, I think they specialize in guilt.
Yeah. We've talked about motivational techniques, but punishment is is something that, it's not new. I mean, that's,
No.
and I mean, coming from the military, and they're not using autonomy supportive techniques to the extent that we're talking about. They have other ideas too.
No lieutenant ever sat me down and said, "What do you think about this? Am I doing this right? I mean, how do you perceive it?"
Well, they might in an ironic way while you're doing push-ups. But it's hard because the theory applies, but it's different. Say with kindergarten students, that's where they have lots of systems of behavior. Where you have color coding and you have full class rewards. They write the word recess on the board, and then they erase a letter as somebody does something stupid, and then everybody yells and goes crazy when they lose recess because of one jerk in the back of the classroom. But the idea is that over time, and I think that's the key here. Don't try this at home, but you need to gradually remove the rewards as children get older, because eventually, they're going to be, in an apartment with chores, So that, I think that's what happens, or that's what maybe should happen according to the theory. But what we do in a school environment is in many cases the opposite. We double down, and it becomes a more incentivized environment, more competition, more surveillance, more rules. So we're taking something that's natural, and I'm getting back to the idea of curiosity and learning. We're built to learn. That's why we've survived, because we can do that, and we're compromising that systematically from a lot of different perspectives, and it's a cultural thing. Because this conversation, I think a lot of people will understand it, but at the same time, people are behaving in a very different way, a different approach,
right,
with teaching and parenting particularly.
Well, one of the things I thought about as you were talking about, the notion of what an orientation might look like in kind of real terms, I couldn't help but think about the math program that was mentioned by who's the guy that we enjoy oh so very much.
Who's that?
Talking about the not political, but kind of social, educational philosopher
Neil Postman.
Neil Postman, yeah. And so, Neil Postman talking about the idea that if you as a school district spend a boatload of money on some sort of math program, and then one of the advertisement bullet points is that if the kid wanted to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning, they could do math. And Postman suggested that if you're not inclined naturally to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning to do math, there being a program that makes it easier to do it isn't really going to work. And if you are the kind of person who's naturally inclined to wake up at 1 in the morning to do math, which I think is a warning sign on multiple levels, but either way, if you're one of those people inclined to do it, you don't need the program to motivate you to do it. And so, we do kind of shoot ourselves in the foot about, in regards to what we push, how we push it, and the money we spend. You think about the money that's spent on various, programs du jour, and it's simply ill-advised spending. But I think I want to take this one step further, because I think
go back to the math, because there's one other point on that these online math programs are built, they have gamification built into them, and I maybe have mentioned this before, but I gave a talk at a company that, did that, built a program. It was a pretty big company, and I talked to all their staff. I mean, not only in person, but virtually. So a lot of people there. And I use this theory and saying what's happening when you're gamifying and you're incentivizing something like math. What's the long-term repercussion? And so my counsel, they said, well, should we just all go home?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. And I don't know if they're in business anymore. No, I'm kidding. But the idea I gave them is that, sure, you need to build competence in some of these, but they're trying to, keep somebody's attention in a way that has nothing to do with the content. They're using other things, badges, competition, and eventually you have to do math.
Right.
Maybe not at 1 a.m, but but they're hurting themselves in the long run.
And I think, once you offer a carrot, the problem is that you're constantly in search of a bigger carrot to offer. You go down a slippery slope to the point where it doesn't matter how big the carrot is. Eventually, at some point, the person will just disengage because it's not interesting anymore.
Right. It's like a drug. Unless you take that carrot and hit the kid over the head with it, then you're using a different motivational technique. But I think so. I think people, the expected reward, it's a contingent reward, an expected reward. That's what can be perceived as controlling and has all these undermining long-term effects.
Mm-hmm.
But there is one type of reward, I guess, or even praise that really does help motivationally. I mentioned informational praise, explaining, talking it through. But the other thing is unexpected, and this is for business owners out there and principals. Rather than
and know who you are. So
but rather than merit pay and competitions between departments to get some gift certificate or something, give it unexpectedly to everybody. But something unexpected, what that does is builds trust, it builds culture, it creates connection. It's only positive. And so don't use it as an opportunity to narrow what people are doing and build these double down again on competition. But unexpected is very positive, and it's motivationally sound because it's not contingent. They're not expecting it, and they won't expect it next year necessarily. It's very different than a planned bonus, but it has a real positive effect.
It does. And unfortunately, though, this is not how it typically plays out. I think I gave the example one time of being in a restaurant. I was by myself and I was having breakfast and the breakfast was over and I thought it was pretty satisfactory. I liked it. And then the waitress came up and she said rather enthusiastically for 7 a.m, as I recalled, she asked me, "Wow, how'd you like that breakfast?" I said, it's not bad. And she said, "Well, I don't like not bad." I said, "Well, do you like hyperbole?" I mean,
Oh boy.
it can't be the greatest breakfast. I mean, come on. What are you expecting from me? And so I think what's that?
I can't leave you alone with anybody.
I think it colors how we talk about a lot of things. And it and it's one of the reasons why what you talk about a dying, kind of a dying field of endeavor. I think about commentators and I think about, talk show hosts or what have you. It's just, it gets to the point where they're running out of adjectives to overblow whatever they're talking about. And so, and it infects every bit of human communication, or certainly has the power to, with regards to praise and in how we look at motivation. One of the things I was thinking about also was how this dynamic affects teachers, not so much in how they interact with the students, but how they kind of motivate themselves. I know you've done research where you looked at, teaching efficacy and how teachers kind of see their job and look at their job. How does this play out for them?
Well, as a employee in any organization, you experience leadership, and ideally you develop internal motivation because of the support of the leader, and they're not micromanaging you. But schools, I think, are unique because you have this cycle of control. I mean, it starts by the problem of having the test scores aggregates, in the newspaper. So suddenly the superintendent has all these corruption pressures to take this measurement and turn it into a goal, for their principals. And so they have a controlled environment, and then it moves downward to teachers, and so they suddenly, if they're worried about test scores, which they are, I mean, it's at the top of the list. That's the test for them, is to get your group of students to hit a certain mark or to have growth goals or whatever it is, and you're evaluated based upon that and incentivized and all these things. So suddenly, with the pressures that the faculty feel, they use similar techniques on. They actually do the same thing to their students. And so I think, potentially breaking that chain with autonomy supportive teaching, because here's the thing, using these strategies, it's been, associated with higher achievement. Students who have a higher quality motivation also perform better, and they also are more creative, more risk-taking behavior, all these good things, outcomes. So it's not like you lose anything. You actually gain a different type of student by doing this. It just takes a little bit more time. It's a little bit more messy. And it's like you complimenting the waitress, about the food, it's not bad. And maybe she didn't understand that. I know from you, that's high praise, when you say that's not bad, that means that's freaking good. But potentially the more autonomy support would be to say, was I tasting green chilies in those eggs? I wonder about that.
Is this pesto? Is this?
Yeah. Let's get the chef here, please. Sir. They'd come out.
Taste the soup. What's wrong with the soup? Taste the soup.
Come after you with a spatula. What are you talking about? Do we need to call security?
We'll have you removed, sir. Well, it's a fascinating area of study, and it's been done by many people over the years, and certainly Dr. Deci and Dr. Ryan and yourself. You're contributing to the conversation. Not to blow smoke up your at you, but the idea that this is important, groundbreaking, essential stuff that's being done. I'm just not sure that anyone within the education realm right now has the ear for it. And I don't think a lot of parents have the ear for it. I think some do. And you're starting to see some of the reactions that parents are having to, the kind of things that are being leveraged to get kids to work. But if you were to provide a prognosis as to how this plays out, do you see, is it a case of no one will be saved? Or, do you think it is possible that this argument can take?
I think it hit its high point, meaning low point, when we had No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top. And I think that we're taking a more holistic view, and often these things are driven by, universities. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they're, taking a second look at the SAT, at student grades, and that's going to have for me a positive effect, because suddenly they're interested in not just that score, and they've found that those scores can be misleading. They don't really predict anyway. So
it does depend on what it's replaced with. The idea of what's better, the devil you know or the devil you don't know. You could get something worse.
You could, but I think the more measures that you have, multiple measures, and some of them qualitative, the better. So I think that there is a pushback, and certainly there's a pushback by educators on testing, and states have scrambled. Even Texas to smooth out the corners a little bit. So initially I think it was very pointed, and now the test score again is one out of many. It's not just state test scores in that evaluation of schools anymore, because they get a rating, but the test score is still prominent. And so I think that there is a tend away from focusing on these measures. I don't know, as far as teaching techniques, I think there's going to be quite a lag there, but that's kind of the business that I'm in, and so I assess all of that and look at the quality of student motivation, and I think even more important, teachers, and why are they in the profession,
right?
So it's there's nothing more fascinating than the why. And often we're so interested in outcomes, but that why is really complicated. We've been talking a lot about motivation, and there's not a motivation. There are motivations, and you can't just characterize it as this box, but it's really nuanced. And in fact, you can have multiple motivations happening at once. I mean, you may be motivated to get a grade. You're trying to get into a really top university, and so that 98 in Mr. Miller's class is really important. But you also love the lectures and you love the content and want to continue it. And so it's not dichotomous in any way. It's more than a moving target. It's really complex and nuanced.
And I think that's one of the problems when people try to dismiss elements of this or components of this and try to dismiss like the entire approach. I may have mentioned the story before, but we shut down in April of 2020, and then as far as like in-person instruction, and then it went to like online. And when it went online, we were basically told that, listen, don't make these last month and a half about grades. Just get assignments or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I remember
and I remember one of my colleagues said, because naturally what happened is that a lot of kids kind of mailed it in.
Yeah.
And a colleague suggested, well, there goes your idea about, no grades. I said, well, I would suggest there's a lot more complicated factors here. I said, I don't think that this is the same thing at all. And so because it's such a nuanced conversation, and I think both in the attempts to try to implement aspects of it, thinking that you're fixing a problem or focusing on certain aspects of the overall theory and suggest that somehow it doesn't work. I think that's very symbolic of how we tend to address things these days. But it's also kind of a comment and an analysis that it doesn't hold water because you're not considering the entire picture.
Yeah, and that's really telling. Why do we do it all? If we get, imagine. There's like this thing in cyberspace that's called a grading portal. And the students can view it. The teachers, obviously, their parents and everybody. And if you magically just turn that off as a social experiment, and suddenly there are no grades, and it's like taking the speed limit and reducing it to 55. There's going to be mayhem, maybe, but there's something.
Nice tie-in, by the way.
Yeah, well, somebody's got to wrap this thing up. But the world wouldn't cave in, and there are other ways to. And what if it was just a qualitative measure, and you let the teacher decide the grade? Just an idea.
Just a crazy thought. What if? Well, I think we've learned. If we haven't learned anything, we've learned that this is a conversation that's not over, because there's just way too many kind of spurs that can be followed and can be looked at and analyzed and talked about, to me, I get why you're so enthralled by the topic, because it's a fascinating topic. There's so much to it that you could easily see how someone can spend their entire life's work, as I believe, if I remember conversations with you correctly, that Dr. Deci and Dr. Ryan have done. But just the idea, and others, who have spent so much time looking at motivation and how it can help, kind of shape what we do and how we do it. So certainly not the last podcast we'll have dealing with motivation.
I hope not. And most academics have one theory that they address throughout their career. Many people out there have listened to many of these podcasts, and besides me trying to be funny and make fun of you and do what I do, this theory permeates what I say. And so go back and listen to every episode and think self-determination theory. Oh yeah, he's not making this stuff up. But it's kind of a mindset that I have, because it does explain. And I've told stories about my own academic and just my background, and there are applications to it. So hopefully we maybe get a few converts, or at least get some people to read the review. And there may be a way, I'm going to try to do this, where we turn this review into a link and put it into the podcast. I think we can do that, particularly if you do it, because you have technical skills that I may not, Herr Miller.
Yeah, well, I think we can link that article, and we can also link if you want to hear more ideas about this. There is a book, as it happens, that called "The Center Cannot Hold: A Critical Look at Contemporary Education," written by yours truly, available at Amazon for your reading pleasure. That will kind of give you kind of a broader look, and then you look at the article that Dr. Bourgeois has penned regarding Dr. Deci's latest work to kind of zero in on some particular aspects of kind of the general ideas we present in the book. And so,
yeah,
everyone, you've got a lot of reading to do. There's a lot of homework you got going up, but I don't want to hear any complaining about it. This is important stuff. And so there you go.
I like it. A shameless plug, but I think people waste their weekends. If you think about it, they should be reading, all weekend, So, who cares about sports or family barbecues? Get to reading.
All right. With that, I'm off to watch football. And so, sorry. I kind of tipped my hand there a little bit, but Dr. Bourgeois, I wish you a good week, and adieu.
Adieu, Herr Miller, and danke.